Welcome. So we are going to do something different than what I have done. Well, I'm going to do something different than I have done. This is going to be the first in a series of short but piano pieces specifically written for piano without words, and just a proper piano piece in that sense. So I'm starting out that way, and eventually I'll get to long hair music at some point. So today we're going to start off with something short and simple. In fact, the next few ones will probably be short and not simple, but shorter. So this is something I went through my piano music that I found from way back. This is something I got back in like the mid-70s. This was a teaching piece. For me, it was a teaching piece. And so these were various jazz, boogie-woogie, blues types of compositions that I learned off of at the time. And I'm going to do one of these today. But the guy who wrote this, William Gillock, I didn't know who he was. These were written actually in the mid-60s when he wrote this particular thing. And ooh, wow, $1.50. Those were the days. But this was William Gillock. I didn't know who he was until I just now, when I decided to do this, I'm starting off with one of these just because I happen to, just for nostalgia reasons, I guess. I decided to see who he was, and I found out that he was somebody. So William Gillock was a piano educator, essentially, who wrote a large body of piano music for teaching pieces and also for children specifically. And he was an educator of real note, so I didn't know who he was, but now I do. He taught in New Orleans. He eventually stopped teaching and became more of a trainer of other educators. He was a judge at for the first junior pianist guild competitions, the only judge, in fact, at the time. And he became really well known as a composer of teaching pieces and for his philosophy of teaching young piano learners. And his philosophy, according to him, was that piano composing pieces, and I wrote this down, had to have a melody and a rhythmic vitality to the compositions that students found interesting. Which then may seem obvious in a way. In other words, you have to write something that people want to learn in order for them to learn it and get something from it. That's, in some way that seems obvious, but in the world of teaching, and certainly in piano teaching, that often isn't the case. It's pretty dry sometimes and pretty boring, and some of the pieces you have to play when you're learning. And to some degree you have to, because there's certain exercises you have to learn how to do. But that's true, I guess, of a lot of things. But still, his idea was that you really got to infuse it with a certain kind of originality and flair, and give it something that the people actually find some kind of interest in, because otherwise it's like you're not going to get anywhere. So that was the way he approached it, and indeed he did that. So if you look, these pieces are the ones that I only knew him by, but they do have a real flair to them, a real melodic sense to them, a real musical sense to them as real pieces. That when you play them, yeah, you're learning something, but they also feel like real compositions by real serious people. And he really did that. He did that to such an extent, and he wrote a large body of pieces for children and teaching pieces. But he did that to such an extent, he became known as, literally, this is how he was known as the Schubert, as in Franz Schubert, the Schubert of educators and the composers of teaching pieces. Because he composed with he had a real rhythmic flair, a real melodic flair, perhaps more so, to what he wrote. Even though they were teaching pieces a lot of times, there was a lot of real melodic bass to them, and they were interesting, and they had flair, and they had charm, they had style and all of that. So it was they're just a cut 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 above the average teaching piece that you find in various compositions for people who are learning. And also, before I get to the piece itself, the idea of composing for children is not new. And the idea when you say I'm composing for children, the automatic assumption is by people perhaps who don't know or who are maybe don't have a real sense of or history of that is that composing for children doesn't mean you're composing simple stuff. It's not simple in the sense that, okay, it's really simple to play, it's dry and boring. You know, composing for children, who wants to play that? But in fact, that you're really composing for what you think children find interesting. And so he's not the only person. So you had Robert Schumann, who I will get to later on in the long hair music section of the program. Robert Schumann composed pieces for children specifically. Who else? There were others, and I can't pull off the top of my head all of a sudden. But I know Schumann did. Mendelssohn, I think, did. Prokofiev, he did in terms of classical music. So, and there are others. I mean, they're not the only ones. They composed music specifically for children, not simply a teaching piece. In fact, some of them were quite hard to play, but they thought that there were things that children as an audience would want to listen to, which is, you know, a totally different slant on that, you know, what you might think about it. You know, so they're not like simple in that sense, but they're childlike in a sense, in terms of how they appeal. So that's just something I throw in there. But he did that, like I said, he received numerous awards, would have trained a lot of teachers, educators, and composed, like I said, a lot of stuff. And beyond just, you know, a lot of times these were teaching pieces, but his music actually, the compositions he wrote actually gained some kind of, you know, fame in some sense in places like Japan. Who would think? Japan, I think Germany, there are other European countries where the things that he composed, like what I'm going to play, it became popular. Not just, you know, for teaching, but I'm saying they became popular like in concert sets, and people would play them. Because they really do have that kind of appeal as, you know, as real pieces of music. I say real pieces of music, as pieces of music that people would want to listen to just to listen to it. So anyways, so that's sort of a little bit of history that I found out about this guy. So he's not nobody. He's like a significant somebody in the world of music education and teaching of music. So like I said, I'm going to play one of these, and this is from the book that I learned a lot ago. And this is one that I remember working on way back, like I said, back in the early 70s or so. But this is one called what? Bourbon Street Saturday Night. And a boogie woogie piece. But it's got a real drive to it, which is great. It's got a real drive to it, and it's got a real flair to it when you listen to it. Sort of a real rhythmic kind of a flair, which is great. So I'm going to play that one. And they're short. It's only going to be like a minute long. So anyways, the introduction is way longer than the piece. Anyways, I'll stop talking. So now, Bourbon Street Saturday Night by William Gillock.